Hello and welcome to Witchy Wellness Radio. I'm your host, Lauren Chalantani, women's holistic health coach and fellow recovering perfectionist. This podcast was created to show you that your body is not in the way, it is actually leading your way. Hello, everybody. You are listening to Witchy Wellness Radio. And again, I'm your host, Lauren. And this episode is number 60, Disordered Eating with Melainie Rogers. Melanie and I talk about disordered eating versus eating disorders. And how do you know if you have a problem with food and your body image? Chances are many of us, if not all of us, at some point in our lives have had issues with this. What makes a difference between an eating disorder or disordered eating? This is such a critical episode and topic that's near and dear to my heart because I know so many people, women specifically, suffer from this. And as we might know, it's not about the food. There's always so much more underneath that. And our beautiful guest today, Melanie, dives into her past and how she got into being an eating disorder certified dietitian, and now is the founder and executive director of Balance, an eating disorder treatment center in New York, who also helps people worldwide online as well. And we talk about really what is the difference between disordered eating and an eating disorder. Melanie's support groups and how she works with clients, the divine body connection and why that's so important, and the staggering fact that only 10% of people with an eating disorder actually seek treatment. And with that being said, how can we approach somebody, a loved one, that we just want the best for them? If you believe that they have an eating disorder, and how you can help them get help. Melanie also recently launched and published Redefining Wellness, the ultimate diet-free guide, a free ebook that contains over 150 expert contributions. And you can find all of this in our show notes below. So without further ado, please enjoy number 60, Disordered Eating with Melainie Rogers. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Witchy Wellness Radio. And again, I'm your host, Lauren, and this is a show where you learn your body is not in your way, but actually leading your way. And today we have the pleasure of talking with Melainie Rogers, and I'm so excited to have her on the show to talk about eating disorders and disordered eating. And she is a certified eating disorder registered dietitian and accredited supervisor in the treatment of eating disorders. She is a founder and executive director of Balance, Eating Disorder Treatment Center, and Melainie Rogers Nutrition, LLC in New York City. Melanie has earned a strong reputation among her colleagues as an expert in the field of eating disorders. She is a dynamic speaker and has been invited to present nationally and internationally on the latest scientific discoveries and treatment approaches with the eating disorder profession. And I'm so excited to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Lauren. I'm really excited to be here as well.
Yeah, and we're recording this in the middle of lockdown quarantine. And I know this is, regardless of the quarantine, this topic affects so much of the population. I know so many of my friends who either have had disordered eating or, actually classified as an eating disorder. And my hope is that, beautiful people like you, we can explain and how to holistically balance this part of your life. And I would love to hear how you kind of got into this field, or, what brings your passion to the work that you do today.
Absolutely. I came into the field not intentionally, I would say. Full disclosure, I'm a fully recovered clinician myself. Unfortunately, like many of us, I struggled with an eating disorder through my 20s. About 8 years of my life I lost to an eating disorder. And I went on to do my master's in clinical nutrition when I was 30. And you may have assessed from my accent, I'm originally from Australia. So I came out here to New York at 30 years of age to pursue the master's in clinical nutrition, not thinking that I would go into eating disorders. In fact, at that time when I looked back, I think I was too close to it, Lauren. I didn't ever acknowledge that I had a full-blown eating disorder in my 20s. I was just uber healthy, and I was vegetarian, and I was running marathons, and I was just healthy until it kind of tripped me up and all the rest of it. But when I came here to New York, I particularly wanted to come to New York because at the time there was an obesity research center here in New York City. And going into the field of nutrition, I thought, well, gosh, because of this obesity epidemic that we were hearing a lot about, I thought as a nutritionist, hopefully that will mean that if I'm plugged into that area of research and practice, I will gainfully be employed for quite a while. So I was just thinking more from that aspect. And also, I really love research. My background's biochem, so I wanted to be close to a research hub, hoping I might even work there. Long story short, I interned there at the Obesity Research Center, and then was invited to work there for a couple of years as a research assistant. And it was while I was there that I was exposed to a treatment program they were offering where they were treating something called binge eating disorder. And I think we understand what that might mean. People who are overeating, and usually for many people also struggling with, their weight trending up. And then for some people, not everyone, health consequences as a result of that, but definitely mobility issues, etc. And I was fascinated, Lauren, because as a nutritionist, we're taught calories in, calories out, but it's so much more than that. And I'm interested in people's behaviors, and the team that they had there working with this clientele, they had a nutritionist, of course, but they had a therapist, they had a psychiatrist, they had a medical doctor, and they had a sports physiologist. So talk about an amazing multidisciplinary team who are approaching the food and the behaviors around eating from different modalities and different angles. And it was just amazing. And it really captured my curiosity and the complexity. It really spoke to the complexity of managing weight and our relationship with food. And that was really the hook. And so after that, and as I went out into the world as a nutritionist, I was really drawn to disordered eating and eating disorders. And of course, I found myself then seeing many presentations of disordered eating and eating disorders in the general population, clients who were coming in to see me in private practice, who were, well, I just want to lose 20 pounds. And I seem to gain and lose the same 20 pounds over and over. And then you really get into their relationship with food and body image distress. And it just opens up so much psychologically and nutritionally. So that was kind of how I fell into it. But what I also found, probably part two, that is maybe no surprise, is that as I was learning more and more about my clients and what they were struggling with and eating disorders, of course I'd heard of eating disorders, but I had no idea really about what it really looked like. So as I was learning more about the research and about the lived experience of my clients, I was putting my own pieces of my puzzle together about what really happened to me or with me in my 20s. And I realized more and more that, my goodness, that wasn't just a healthy bout of vegetarianism and marathon running. That was actually an eating disorder. And I was able to really identify it for what it was, and then go through my own recovery, my own psychological recovery, because by that stage I had gone through my own nutritional rehabilitation and weight restoration and such. And so to this day, fast forward 20 plus years later, the more I learn from, as new research presents itself, I'm still finding pieces of the puzzle to put together for explaining to our clients what's going on, but also more pieces to my own story of kind of how I got to where I was and why that was something that happened in my life, what sustained it, and then also what led to my own recovery. So that's kind of it in a long version of a nutshell.
Yeah, I love hearing kind of the backstories from everybody because it always does have a personal healing component of it. And I know I love learning from other people's stories, that hero's journey. And that's what makes us so passionate about wanting to help and hold that space for other people. You
So
yeah, you relate.
you
Um,
so do, and sorry to cut you off there. And
right.
you understand, not that you can't be a good clinician or good at anything if you haven't had the lived experience, right? So, our docs who work with cancer patients, they don't have to have had cancer to be empathic and compassionate, of course not. But there is something about the nuance, because you know the pain because you've lived the pain, and so it's always there. And you get, in this case, you get the head spin that goes with eating disorders. And yeah, I found it profoundly satisfying. And it's also, I guess, my way of giving back and wanting to help clients and anyone out there struggling to somehow try and get them into treatment sooner, because full recovery is possible, and to help get them to the other side of that journey faster, and to help them to not fall into the place of constant relapses, which is often, which is quite common with the treatment of eating disorders.
Now, we talked a little bit off air about the difference, hoping to talk to about the difference between eating disorders and disordered eating. I know I'm sure this is a big can of worms to open up, but could you kind of walk us through the differences or maybe even similarities of them?
Absolutely. A lot of similarities, actually, because they're basically the same thing on a spectrum. So full-blown eating disorders, there's certain symptoms that are occurring, X number of times a week, and it's happened for 3 months, at a time, or whatever. So it meets certain criteria. But the larger percentage of the population actually struggles with disordered eating, which is, I go on a diet or I restrict for a certain number of days or weeks or months, and then maybe I come off it. Or I'm always trying to lose that extra 5 or 10 or 15 pounds. Or maybe there are times during the month where I might overeat and throw up, but I only do it a couple of times a month, so it's not really a big deal. And my coach taught me how to do it, or whatever it might be. So that's actually disordered eating. But in a with less intensity as far as frequency. But I think the important thing there, Lauren, is to know that it is just as distressing to the person who's experiencing it as someone who has a full-blown eating disorder. Because I think in the general public, disordered eating or dieting and watching your weight and being a bit obsessive about calories is so normalized that people don't even realize that it is actually getting to a place, or maybe getting to a place where it's quite harmful for them. And it's getting obsessive to the point that it starts to interrupt their life. So, for example, if your friend said to you, Lauren, hey, we're going to go out to a restaurant, and you're thinking, oh my God, well, if it's not a sushi restaurant, then I can't go because I won't know the calories in the food, and sushi is the only food that is safe for me. So you'll say, where are you guys going? Oh, we're going out to an Italian place. Oh, well, actually, you know what? Sorry, I forgot. I've got something else I need to do. And you bail and you don't go out for this event, or you tell your friends you've already eaten, or maybe you're dating and you're finding it really hard because you don't want to be eating all these meals with your new love interest or whatever. So it can be very profound in the way that it's already disrupting your life. And that's disordered eating. And what we know for sure is that that can escalate and get worse and worse over time. And so, my shout out to people is, take notice. Like, I know society normalizes this stuff, and Instagram normalizes a lot of this stuff, and there's always a new diet out there. But it's not always so healthy, actually, quite the opposite.
Yeah, I remember when I was going through health coaching school, I first heard of the term orthorexia. And I was like, that kind of pinpoints a lot of what I am dealing with, you know. I would almost be proud of my Whole Foods purchase, you know, checking out all organic, vegan, raw, gluten-free, and
Yeah.
I can relate to like going to a party or someone's house and like, well, what if they don't have a raw vegan dip there? What am I going to do? What am I going to eat? Do I bring my own food? XYZ. And yes, eating healthy feels great, but that is disordered eating, or even, depends on what what part of the spectrum you fall into. It's it's something that you become so obsessive about, which was completely new to me. And I know so many people are so fixated on the weight or the way they look, but for me, I'm like, don't look at what you have to lose. Look at what you have to gain by a balanced lifestyle. Because I think a lot of people trying to get in shape or change any habit about themselves really stems from, what are you telling yourself? And is it something that because you hate yourself, or is it because you want to change because you love yourself enough to make the change?
True.
So with that, when people come to see you, either work with you at the center or want to maybe get to know you online, I mean, there's all sorts of people on the spectrum. What kind of person who might not think they might need help with their eating or disordered eating, what are some symptoms other than what we kind of talked about with the eating out and not wanting to go to the restaurant that you see typical in some of your clients?
A question I like to ask people that can help us kind of get to how disruptive is this, is to ask yourself how much of your day do you spend thinking about calories, weight, organic, vegan, the number on the scale, your clothes, how they fit, etc. How much of your day? And there's a couple of support groups I run actually, Lauren, and I ask the participants to put up their hand, let's say 20%, 50%, 75%, 100%, 120%, because we know that for people who are heavily restricting, they may be thinking about food all day and dreaming about it as well, such as the instinct of the body to push us towards seeking out food. So I ask people to think about how much of their day realistically are they thinking about those calories and weight and such. And what we find is that people are kind of surprised, because you and I are having a conversation right now, but if I were still in my eating disorder, in the back of my mind, like I would be talking to you, I'd be going through the motions, but in the back of my mind, I would be thinking about, and I had that for breakfast this morning, and then I had for lunch. So for dinner, should I have that or should I cut that out? Because, I did have that for lunch and I had that extra piece of bread, so that's not good. And this would be what would be going on in my mind right now. Thank God it's not, because it is exhausting, as you would imagine, and it is. So that's one thing I ask clients, and then I ask them about desire to lose weight, fear of weight gain, how much they might skip meals, how much they might try to eat less or eat low fat or low this or low that, how many foods they've cut out of their diet. So a big one, of course, is veganism, which is often a pursuit to be really healthy, and also there's usually a strong ethical component there as well around treatment of animals in our food industry, which I just love that. But in the world of eating disorders, that can be something that our clients grab onto, because it's I want to be careful about how I say this, but it's not that people are not concerned about animals, but they're more concerned about fear of weight gain. And that's actually the real driver behind the adoption of a vegan eating plan, because it's easier when you go out to say, oh, I'm vegan, sorry, I can't eat that. And it gives you license to say no to foods, because otherwise people will start asking questions. Why aren't you eating? What's wrong with you? So we definitely see that, and we see a lot of elimination of different foods. So for example, no carbs, I don't eat carbs, or I don't eat this, or I don't eat that. And again, for many people that could be a step towards being healthy, but we want to really get at the true motivation behind what some of those dietary habits might be. So those are some of the things that we start to ask and look at.
Yeah, and I always think of, when you actually do eat, even if it's this raw, organic, gluten-free, perfect meal, if you are so stressed out and in fight or flight, your body cannot digest or utilize that whatsoever. It won't matter what you eat, and essentially. So I'm sure you work with your clients with understanding, how you're balancing everything, your mind body connection. How do you approach that with somebody as your potential client?
The mind-body connection, you mean?
Yeah.
Absolutely, you have to. So you have to treat the whole person, because this is not, we're talking about food as food as fuel. So we're talking about it from a biological perspective, of course, but we're also talking about the psychological relationship with food and the psychological relationship with our body, which is also about self-esteem and self-confidence. And then we need to add in their personality traits, like if we think about the etiology of an eating disorder or disordered eating. So we have to be looking at all of these pieces together and looking at behaviors, not just around food, but behaviors across the board. Like, what's your relationship like in relationships, or what's your relationship to money like? What's your relationship to sex like? What's your relationship to work, and do you tend to overwork? Are you perfectionistic? And by the way, Lauren, I'm sure you've looked into this, because I know that a big part of what you do is around perfectionism and looking into that and working through that. But perfectionism and obsessive compulsive disorder, right, and anorexia or eating disorder behaviors, there are huge overlaps around those areas. And you mentioned orthorexia, which orthorexia can very much be the pursuit of health, and is not actually connected so much to weight loss in the way that anorexia is. So that's how they're quite different. But the differences tend to stop there, because a lot of the obsessive traits are still very much there, and the distress. So the thing is, when we talk about health, we tend to get really myopic around food. But as you rightly pointed or touched upon, health is not just about what you eat. It's also about just your psychological health, which means not being in fight and flight, not being constantly stressed out about, did I get the vegan version of that, or did I get the organic version of that, or, oh my goodness, they were out of that, and I had to buy non-organic, and I don't know if I can handle eating non-organic or whatever it might be. So we're talking about health in a holistic perspective, which is health from what you put into your body, but also your thoughts and your psychological health, right? Mental health being a huge topic right now as we all shelter in place. And then, of course, relationship health and money health and financial health, and the whole spectrum are essential components in the pie chart around what is being healthy, activity in there as well.
Yeah, and I love the name of your company, Balance, because it's really what it is. It's this holistic. I think of health as almost like a garden, and learning to tend and fertilize and sometimes weed different areas for it to be in this beautiful symbiotic relationship with itself. And I mean, you mentioned looking at finances, relationships, intimacy. It bleeds over so many barriers. And I think, health is just not one symptom. It's really the root cause of what, you've hinted at, those beliefs of a lot of self-esteem issues, I'm not worthy, or I'm not enough, or a lot of guilt and shame too related around that. That's what I see with working with people, and in my own self too, is learning how to get clear and uncover those kind of core disbeliefs about yourselves, about reality, Could you speak a little bit, we touched a little bit on the core beliefs that are a lot of the times at the root of this distorted eating or eating disorders?
Absolutely. So, you know, it's a fairly complex kind of domino effect, if you will. But and I was listening to your earlier podcast with Stephanie, and she was talking about the baggage that we bring with us from our childhood, right? So if we start there with childhood trauma and big T or little T trauma, it can be referred to. Big T trauma is someone was sexually abused or physically abused as a kid. I mean, that's some really bad stuff there. But for many of us, and Stephanie touched upon this, we're ultra sensitive. And so if our parents were just not quite emotionally tuned into us, not from lack of trying, but just they weren't quite emotionally tuned into us, then we can, and the environment where we're just bombarded with, a lot of stimulus and can leave us feeling a little bit unsafe in the world. That can be enough to start to kind of percolate the sensitivity that then is like a garden, as you said, the right fertile soil for an eating disorder to then develop. And then a part of that around self-esteem, and particularly for women, young girls, and unfortunately more and more for guys, where we're surrounded by images that to be loved, which is a core need for all of us, to be loved and to be lovable, you must look a certain way. And unfortunately right now, because this is episodic, but cultural norm is the thin ideal. And we're surrounded by that. So our young kids get this idea that I must be thin to be lovable. And then if you attach your self-esteem to that, because when you're that young, you haven't figured out who you are yet. So you're so vulnerable. Your body goes through changes with maturation, which is just freaks most of us out, right? We're uncomfortable, we're out of sorts, we don't have any life experience, and we certainly don't have any skills yet to kind of figure out all these thoughts that are going on in our heads. And so one thing leads to another, and we decide, I'm going to go on a diet because obviously I need to lose weight, because then I'll be considered more prettier or pretty, and I will be therefore lovable, possibly to my family as well as to romantic connections out there. And so what we know for sure, Lauren, is that every single person who develops an eating disorder has been on a diet. So we regard dieting as a gateway behavior to an eating disorder, because what we understand from the research right now is that for those of us who are genetically vulnerable, and I myself am that person, if you go on a diet and you lose weight below what your body is genetically programmed, a weight your body's genetically programmed to function at as optimal weight for you, we believe it kind of turns on the illness. And before you know it, you go down a rabbit hole. So instead of kind of cutting calories and losing a few pounds, now you're realizing, my gosh, I'm thinking about food so much more, and I'm starting to get obsessive, and I'm weighing myself 3 times a day, and the scale changed by half a pound, and now I'm freaking out, and you're in that rabbit hole. And then before you know it, you can't even pull out if you want to. And so that's where we know it's an illness, and you need help and support to work through that. And I think a lot of people don't know, because it's so normalized that people don't realize they're in really dangerous terrain. And they also don't realize that in that dangerous terrain, it's essential to reach out for help. So what happens is that far too many people try to do this on their own and think that, oh, well, tomorrow I'll get I'll get it together, and tomorrow I'll pull out of this. And next thing you know, it's 5 years later and they're still caught up in the same behaviors. The idea of I'm not sick enough to warrant treatment, because I think in society also with eating disorders, we only tend to think of anorexia and we think of someone who looks like a skeleton. And so if I don't look like a skeleton, then I'm not sick enough. So maybe this isn't really anorexia, but I just lost some weight and I'll be fine. The other piece to this is, because it's just food, then I should be able to figure this out on my own. This isn't kind of a medical thing. I don't need to go and see a doctor. That would be embarrassing. So we see people struggle for far too long with this illness. Only 10% of people who develop an eating disorder actually get treatment, which is heartbreaking to me, Lauren. Heartbreaking, because it's a terrible existence, and yet 90% of people continue on throughout their entire lives, often with this very disordered, very obsessive relationship with food.
And I think the way that we view healthcare now, especially in the US, is not so much preventative.
Oh,
Usually it's very emergency medicine related. And I think that kind of plays into, that 10% number, which is that blew me away. And it made me think about if you're a loved one of somebody who might be displaying these symptoms, how is there a way to approach the person? Or I know it's a touchy line here, but if you see somebody you love struggling, how can you help?
yeah, absolutely. If you see someone struggling, do say something, but say it gently and compassionately. Um, Unfortunately, when I was struggling, my family comes from that mode of thinking where if you yell loud enough and if you shame enough, someone will change their behavior. And we know now from the research, I say that laughingly, we know now that shaming people doesn't change their behavior, makes them worse, and it makes them go underground. So that's not a good approach. I would recommend against that. But going to someone and saying, hey, I love you, I adore you, you're one of my dearest friends, or whomever, or my sister, or whomever it might be. But I've noticed lately that you're not quite yourself. And I've noticed, I don't know, maybe you're not eating a lot, or I notice sometimes you're eating more than I've seen you eat. And is everything okay? Just broaching the topic, because what they will typically say is, I'm perfectly fine and mind your own business. And they'll get defensive, right? And that may be very off-putting, and you may anticipate that they're going to say that, so you may not say anything at all to begin with. But I do implore people, please say something gently, kindly, compassionately, because what you're signaling to your loved one is that I see you and I know everything's not okay. And you may not be able to have that conversation with me right now, but at least you know that I've noticed and I'm here. Because our clients talk about, it took maybe 2 or 3 or 4 times for people to kind of say, hey, I've noticed something is not right, before they fessed up, or before they said, okay, I'll go and get checked out or whatever. But they always say that they were so grateful that someone said something, because we also hear that no one said anything, so I thought I was perfectly fine. Because if no one's commenting, that means that this is not a problem. So I know it's a big responsibility, and it's not a conversation people want to have, because you expect that you're going to be pushed off and it may ruffle the relationship. But if you do it from a place of compassion and love for this person that means so much to you, they'll remember that, and hopefully over time it will sink in, and they'll get to their own process, their own stage in the process of being able to say, where they move through denial, because denial is the first point, right? So denial, I don't have a problem. And then they'll get to a place where it's like, well, maybe I do have a problem. So, and maybe there at that point they might reach out to you and say, hey, you know how you said that to me? Yeah, actually I'm a little bit in trouble and I don't know what to do. Could you help me? Could we go online together? Or could you come to this support group with me? Or what do you think? And I got to tell you, as a friend, or as a person who is there for someone during such a time for them, that's really really an act of love, and to have that support is a wonderful thing.
Yeah, taking tiny acts of courage like that, you never know, showing up for someone, how that's going to impact them.
Yeah.
And so I definitely encourage anybody to lovingly, like you said, to show up and check in. I know we talked a lot about, disordered eating, or eating disorders, with kind of thinking the dieting and weight loss of being skinny rail thin. But what I've seen, and I know this might be a touchy subject for some people, is the other side of it, which, these beautiful women are not eating healthy, but justifying it because they're proud of their bodies. And in my viewpoint, I think there's no perfect diet, but I see a lot of people, saying F body image, and I think you should be proud where you are. But I see just the opposite sides of diet culture, this subculture coming up where we're going to justify not eating healthy in a different way. I don't know if you've seen this, but I see it, and I think every body shape is beautiful, but we also need to take care of ourselves, mind, body, and soul as well.
Mind, body, and soul, absolutely. Yeah, there's a couple of movements that we've seen. We've seen the body positivity movement, which I love, because it's people who are in higher weight bodies who are saying, screw the thin culture, this is my body and it's the only body I've got. And I mean, we also know that diets fail and diets actually worsen underlying health conditions. So if you're in a larger body, who is society to tell me that that is not beautiful? And so there's an embracing of it, which I love. I love that. And there's also the health at every size movement, which has been misunderstood actually, the idea that no matter what size or shape you are, you're healthy, which is not really what that's about. It's about no matter what size or shape you are, you can be healthy. You can take steps towards being a healthier version of yourself. So let's say you've dieted all your life, and yo-yo dieting we know leads to further weight gain and further weight gain and further weight gain. And now, which often happens for my clients, Lauren, they're 100 pounds at a weight that's 100 pounds higher than they ever were. And yo-yo dieting has taken them there. And we know that there are irreversible biochemical changes that are going to make it impossible to lose the weight and keep it off. So now they have no option but, okay, this is my new set point, this is my new body, what the hell am I going to do now? And so the point of it being that you can you can find ways for joyful movement, you can find ways to nourish your body through looking at what you are eating. And I think at the end of the day, yes, there are some people who are also saying, screw you, I get to choose if I'm healthy or not. Like, I think there's almost a backlash, which is, what's all this focus on healthy? Because people use it as an excuse to judge people, actually. Like, you're not being healthy, you're not taking care of yourself, tusk, which I think is completely inappropriate. No one has a right to comment on what you're doing with your body. However, I do feel that we have a biological responsibility to our body to fuel it appropriately. I mean, that's me, and I'm a nutritionist, so that's part of my core value. But that doesn't mean that it's someone else's core value. And their core value may be that it's important for me to eat any foods that I want as much as I want, and it's no one else's business except for mine. And I have to say, at the end of the day, that is up to them. You know, and we as a society have spent many years fat shaming people who are in a higher weight, thinking of them as lazy and no willpower and all sorts of very negative judgments. And so I think there's a real backlash around that. And I think that it's kind of the pendulum has swung from here and it's all the way over here. And I think that people are just trying to find their voice. There's a lot of social justice that's also in that movement. And I think we're going to kind of find where the pendulum is then going to settle. So I think the point I want to say is, at the end of the day, I want to help people be the healthiest version of themselves. But I think we have to remember that people also have a right to not be healthy if they don't want to be. Right?
That's true.
I wouldn't want that life, and I wouldn't want that existence. But they do have that right. So I don't know if that helps.
No, it did. I know I'm not in this as much as you are, and I see the backlash. And I just was like, I'm sure she has some beautiful perspective on all of this. And what I have seen with most people, once you get to that place, like you said, mindful movement, acceptance, and loving where you are, who you are right now, that's when your body can take a nice deep breath and go, and I think no matter what size you are, once you get to the point of acceptance and love and moving and fueling and with food and your thoughts and your relationship with every area to a point where you're happy, that's when your body is probably going to be able to rebalance of where it feels safe to be.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think I think being peaceful within yourself, as in your mind is peaceful, hopefully your body feels peaceful. Um, it's a hard and long battle to fight to get there. I feel very grateful that I've 20 years of therapy and all of this work, having recovered from an eating disorder and in the profession that I'm in. I'm so grateful that I'm in this place, and of course, I think we're all a work in progress. So there's more work for all of us to do, but I think that's part of the wonderful thing about being human is this ongoing self exploration and curiosity, and so that's a journey that I value and that I love about my life. And when we delight in something, we just want other people to do the same thing because it works for me, But anyway, that's part of the reason why I love helping people get better, because I know what it is like on the other side of that velvet rope.
Yeah, and I feel the same way. And it's not about, I want to clarify, there's no one place of nirvana or when you get to. I think for me, it's setting myself up every day to have a wider perspective that I've been through a lot of stuff, but I know it's always worked out. Sometimes it might seem like things weren't working out, but eventually it has. And just having the perspective that everything is figure outable. Reach out to somebody like yourself if you need help, or ask a friend. It for me, it's the biggest thing is the decision of, do we want to become the masters of our lives, or do we want life to try to master us? And that's my hope, to inspire other people, no matter what's going on in your life, is take the first step.
Yeah.
Because it's all just a bunch of little steps. It's, how do you eat the elephant? One bite at a time, which I am still pretty plant-based, but
we need a plant-based version of that, right? Absolutely. But it's exactly right. One step at a time. The one great journey was started by the first small step, or what the first step, or whatever the Chinese proverb there. The same thing, though, right? Yeah. Absolutely. I'm a big proponent of being the driver of your own journey, being in the driver's seat, and you actively making the decisions in your life of what direction your life goes in, as opposed to being a passive recipient, almost a victim, if you will. And life happens to you. No, I want to be creating my life and just kind of pushing the edges of the envelope and seeing, like, where does all this go, and what else can we do, and find out and explore and experience. There's just some really great stuff there. And one thing I also like to say, Lauren, which is so important, is I also tell my clients that if I was still in my eating disorder, I wouldn't have what I have in my life right now. Like, I have my business. I wouldn't have the energy or the focus to be able to give it, and give the focus to my clients and my staff that I do. I'm also a mum. I wouldn't have the energy to devote to a business and a small child. She's 6 and requires a lot of attention, as every 6-year-old needs and should. And so I like to relay that to my clients as well. So I know the things that I would have lost out on or could never have manifested in my life if I was devoting so much energy to my eating disorder, and a stupid number on a scale, you know. But we know it's much more than that. Obviously, it's not about the weight. That's just the manifestation of underlying anxiety and so much more. But nonetheless.
I was just going to say the same thing. You said it much more beautiful than I did, but realizing whatever challenge we're going through is like this initiation to become that deeper, truer version of who you're meant to be. There's this big potential. I think of it as a slingshot. The bigger the challenge, the higher the potential energy to sling you forward. And not so much forward, but to uncover and discover a deeper sense of life, a more vibrancy of life, however that unfolds for you.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, with that, I would love to end this beautiful episode. Was there anything else you wanted to cover before we close the show today?
I think we covered a lot of great stuff, Lauren, and in joining you today, my hope and my goal was really just letting people know that put the full-blown eating disorder idea aside, but just look at your own relationship to food and your relationship to your body. And if it's taking up a lot of bandwidth, a lot of brain power, a lot of energy, just know that, you know, there are resources out there that could kind of help to kind of pull that back to where it would better serve you, so you could spend your energy on other things. So just to plant that seed for people. And we're definitely out there and can help, and we have a free support group and different things and services to help people take that initial step to just kind of checking out kind of, what do you guys think about what I'm going through? Does that qualify as this or whatever?
Beautiful. Thank you again for coming on the show. I know I learned a lot, and my hope is that the listeners did as well. And as all the listeners know, we love to have you challenge us as an act of gratitude and service for you, because I am so grateful for you not only doing the work and helping so many beautiful people, but like we just said, showing up for yourself. You know, neither of us would have been here if we didn't decide to show up for ourselves. So thank you. And finally, how may we be of service for you today?
I would love it if our listeners would really think about their health and take that step. You know, as we know, only 10% of people reach out for help, and so many more people are suffering. And so my message is, you don't have to suffer, and there are people there out there to support us. And of course, we can be a resource. And you know, you have my website, etc. But you know, do reach out for help and get some support if you need it.
I agree. And reach out to a loved one if you feel concerned in a loving, compassionate way as well. Yep.
Absolutely.
Thank you again, and I hope to talk to you soon.
Thanks so much, Lauren. That was great. Bye for now.